All right. So I can't tell if it actually is really live streaming until it's finished redirecting me. So, okay.
YouTube says we're live now.
All right. That's a good clue.
I'm
Okay,
watching
so
this.
just to recap for anybody watching this, there's two big agenda items we have. One is postmortem on appeals, data leakage. Anybody have any other items that they're thinking about now that even if we don't talk about them today, that's okay, but we can add them to the agenda so we don't lose track of them. Okay. All right. So let's see. Maybe a good way to start with the appeals issue is, Aubrey, if you just want to kind of like summarize, what you were doing, what you ran into, and then I can talk about what I noticed, and then we'll just kind of get some ideas. We don't have to go too deep into it because I think we've solved the problem for now, but I just want to gather ideas about if there's any things we should change or other ways to catch this kind of thing in the future rather than happenstance.
So on Thursday of last week, I was just doing some testing on a form that is not live, and the send to court button was not working. I think I was getting an error with, is it AL courts? And honestly, Michelle and I popped in to ask Michelle how to fix it, and we realized that it was different than a bunch of the other appeals forms, how the code worked, which then made me go and look at the one that was live and see if that was working, and it was not working. So I actually didn't do much. I just reached out to you and handed you the problem, and haven't gone back in to update anything or fix anything else because I wasn't sure where everything landed.
Okay.
That's really it.
And so I think what happened is that there were some interviews there were a couple of different problems in different appeals forms. We only had let's pull those up so we can just see what they are actually. There's not a long list. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 live appeals forms. And that was what I was hoping to talk about with you, Aubrey, but honestly, the list is right here, so I didn't really need to look at it. I didn't need to get any more from you about what forms should I check. I just checked all of these. And there's some that were built on MA Virtual Court. There are some that were built from the ground up on the assembly line framework, and there were some that were migrated. And there is this repository, Mass Appeals Court, which is a dependency of all 3 of those different states of forms. So just like this. Ooh, this is really slow. It's probably my screen sharing. So someone else can take notes, I guess, if they don't mind. So, okay, thanks, Bryce. I think what happened is a couple of different things. One is this had been updated in different ways, but the newest version wasn't installed on all of the servers that use it. The other thing that happened is that the updated code wouldn't have worked with the MA Virtual Court based repositories. I guess that's the the 2 things that were going on. So I guess one final thing is that maybe some of the code that was migrated from MA Virtual Court to assembly line, there were some names that were still referring to the old stuff and some to the new stuff. So it wasn't easy to make a clean break. But I think the main issue was just the 2 different versions of this repository that were installed in different locations. So I think that's a description of the issue. I don't think, so there was the old appeals court forms that were installed in the production server were working. There was a new one that had been tested end to end on the dev server, but the versions of the packages that it was tested on didn't match the version that was on the live server. So it wasn't working on the live server. And it was only really at the send to court stage that any of these problems appeared. It wasn't something that was stopping people from generating documents, but they weren't able to deliver them to the court. Or might have been stuck on an error screen and not be able to get past it, and not download the document, of course, too. But only once they tried to submit it to the court. So that's, I can slow down and go over any of that in more detail. I know not everyone absorbs that information that way out loud really well, but that's my basic summary of what happened. What I did to try to resolve it was to go through, take any of the forms that were still using MAVC, and I just copied in for now. Instead of making a fork of this repo that was for MAVC, I just copied in the relevant file, which is just this one file here. And really, basically, the variables involved were MA courts, court 0, and trial court. The way that they were kind of tangled up a little bit, some of the issues were like the new send to court code doesn't use court 0, right? It uses trial court. But we also had to distinguish some of the different uses between trial court and appeals court, because they're all appeals court forms. Cover page needs to refer to appeals court, not trial court. But I'm probably going in too much of the weeds here. So, but yeah, just any clarifications people have there, and then we can move into thoughts.
Thoughts?
I have a question
Okay, go
before I
ahead.
move into thoughts.
Yeah, clarifications first.
So the fixes that you put, are those only for the live ones? Because I think that there might be a few that are developed but not put on, like they're in the testing stage essentially. And I just want clarification on if they need a change and what that change or an update should be.
If they're being developed to use the assembly line framework, then, which is like any form that was started after October, I think, then maybe even December. But
After it would have been started after January.
oh, January.
We didn't update the Weaver to use assembly line until January.
Okay. So that's the question, Aubrey. Do you know if it was started after January? The code was run through the Weaver after January.
There's one that I'm not sure, but all the other ones would be after January.
We could take a look at that. Do you know which one it is?
It was the one I was testing that's never been put to production. It is the motion to reconsider.
Okay, I believe I did fix that one because that was one of the ones that you specifically.
Yeah, I assume because it was the one that I originally flagged.
So that one is all set.
Okay. And so if I find any more, I can just look to that repo to see what happened. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that there are any.
I think that all of the updated packages are installed here on the server, which is really just means Mass Appeals Court should be something like, yeah, 0.04. That looks like that's the right version. Send to court patch.
Branch yet.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we just checked that here. That's probably the same because that's all I did is I merged that and then I bumped the version, but let's make sure it's the master version. Okay, that's actually, I bumped it again to 1.0, 0.0. Okay, so that wasn't actually the latest version. but we don't, while that's updating, we don't have to really focus on that part. Do people have other questions that?
The only other question I had was, so we discovered this internally. Did we ever like get anything? Because I know Paul has been giving us updates on like, oh, like Peel's got this and it's gone through. Well, we haven't gotten any feedback from Paul or anyone else at the appeals court that like this was like something was wrong, which sorry, maybe I guess makes sense because we would have been, the bug was we were sending, right? It was either airing or we were sending them to the wrong trial court email. Is that correct?
I don't think any forms ever got sent to the wrong email. As far as
Okay,
I
it would have aired out before then. You think?
it would have aired out before then, yeah.
Okay.
So the older forms that were live, I think were working fine. I think that the only error was with the newer ones that probably weren't like heavily used yet. So that's probably why we didn't hear about them.
Okay, that's fair.
But I did see an error. Like I think you might have seen it too in the mass access mailbox. So
Yeah.
that was actually what tipped me on to it being affecting a live form, but it wasn't a heavily used form. And so that we were still getting reports back about the more, the eviction form, because that was the highest used one, and that one was working fine.
I have a question.
Sure.
About, okay, so what's the protocol of install the latest on the production server? Like, do you do it one by one? Like, if a form is merged into the master, which is, I consider that means if it passed the test, at that point, then someone installs it on the live server. Is that how it goes typically? Or do you wait for a while and you do the periodically, you just, let's say every other week or whatever interval that you install the latest?
That's a good question. And that could be like part of the different solutions that we could put in place. The process right now is if someone creates an update and it works, I do make sure it's installed on the test server. But unless I know that it needs to be installed on the production server, I don't necessarily update the production server to the latest version of AL document every week, for example, just because we've merged it to master.
Yeah, that's a good point. So then there is a communication thing then. So when people update their system, they need to let you know somehow.
Yeah, I try to do updates right if it's to a package that is one interview and only affects the one interview, then I am happy to update it because then it's like there's some new feature and it's not, the scope of it doesn't affect anybody else, then I'm generally updating that faster than a package that's relied on by other packages on the production server. Yeah.
Another thought is that I don't know if it's doable. I don't know how to do it myself. So, but is it possible that you can run some kind of batch process on GitHub that will compare what's on the live server versus what's on the in GitHub, and just make sure all the master branches are installed on the live server?
I think there is a way we can do something like that. And I guess we have to decide like what the servers are that are involved. So I would say like maybe the test server, the point of the test server is to mirror production. Maybe it could be one step ahead of production if we're like testing a doc assemble update.
I generally think of it as one step ahead, but even on the interviews, that's what we do is we install it on the test server and then someone is testing it on the test server. And then once it's good, it moves to production. It probably lags behind more than it should,
Seems
but that is how I think we use it.
it seems like, you know, other than like individual interviews, maybe the environments should remain the same, because that's, you know, it's a test for production. Like that's, I think, what I've understood as the description of the test server. Like it's supposed to be production, except for you have more interviews that are live there than are live on the production server or whatever, right? Like more, like you're testing everything in the kind of production-like environment.
I mean, that's something we could make it be that, I think. I guess the question does arise then, though, how do you test something like AL document updates to that before they go into the production server?
I would say that would be tested on the dev server, right?
Before you make it production, you go straight from dev to production?
Well, just, you know, do all the testing you can on dev, and then test is just like a brief, like when you're testing on test server, it's brief in order to immediately thereafter put it on live.
I think that the issue, I think the reason why we haven't been doing that, and I'm not saying it's the right choice, is to think about like, well, what kind of regressions could come up and what ways do we have to know that those regressions have appeared? And in this case, this was really an example of a regression, right? Like the new interview someone was testing would work great. The framework was working great. The mass appeals court repo was working great. The problem was good that we didn't install in production as is, because that would have caused a regression to an other interview that people weren't necessarily considering in the scope of the new behavior. And I think when we do updates to AL document, or there's just that's every interview, right? Like this was just affecting potentially 3 interviews, I guess, that were on the old MFAC repo.
And this wouldn't have been sufficient to have it on the dev server and catch it there as opposed to the test server?
Not unless someone was running those old interviews. That was the way we found it. It was by happenstance. So like by not having things installed right away from test to production, I guess even just letting it sit there a little bit longer means that there's a little bit more time to catch those idiosyncratic kinds of issues that aren't part of specific tests that we have written, which is most of the things, honestly. We don't have specific tests for most things.
The other, I feel like we're talking a lot about like versioning and moving stuff to prod, which is good, and I feel like part of it, but I feel like there are a few other parts. One is that just like the fact that the bug was in send to court, and I think I saw a few conversations about it on Friday, which I agree with, that like not a lot of people test send to court because is it sent into the court, which I like agree. At one point I had done, I think it was probably in relation to some of the stuff of like testing that like actually testing to make sure that like if it was on like localhost or something, that it's not going to send emails to the court. But the point was, I was also kind of like hesitant to test it. And once I did it, I was like, cool, I'm not going to try and test this too much. And that's definitely like an issue. And we should maybe change, instead of just changing like, oh, this is the email that's sent to, like behind the scenes, like show it to the user of like, in the same way that we at the top, we have like the ID of the interview and some extra debug information, see if there's a way that we could like, like confirm that like this is on a test interview, it will not get sent to a court, like show that somewhere as well. And then the other thing that I just feel was kind of related to the other part, but is more of like just there's a general hesitancy to put things on production, which is good. Like Quentin mentioned, it's good. It's good in that it prevents regressions, but it does result in more issues like this where something is wrong in production because it's like not a lot of people have the time to be like, okay, I'm gonna make sure everything is right. I'm gonna go and change something in production and test it as well as I can. And so you end up with production lagging behind in certain packages more than it should. And the only thing I can really think that we could change with that would be just to know when things are failing in production more often, which we do now. Like this was a thing that last week we just added an email every time something fails in production so that we know it fails in production. And so we can catch anytime that like something like a user has shown an error, but they don't report it because it's not all users are going to report every single bug that they see on a website. And so we can catch more of those now, but I can't think of like anything more additionally we would want to do besides for just know about those two things. But, that's it.
We could also set up regression tests if this is this was a regression issue. We can set up regression tests that ideally press I'd have to check how the appeals button or how to send to court button would work with our testing framework, but we could even make a step for that. So, and then run it on, I suppose, I didn't completely understand like where the disconnect happened, but either run it on the test server when things were about to go to production to make sure that old interviews were not broken or something like that. Somewhere along the process.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a good idea. I mean, it's hard to decide if we want to have an integration test where we're actually sending emails to court for real, though that's the challenging part. I think maybe we could do that with the appeals court, but it still does go to 4 or 5 people. So I think it's not just one person.
Could we put a flag on
person
test?
who we have a close relationship with, but sorry.
Could we somehow put a flag, put a flag on things that were being sent from a specific account so that those were redirected to a non-production email?
I mean,
or is that not useful?
Well, I mean, the issue, right, is like whenever you have a test that doesn't actually reflect the production thing, you're trying to scope it as small as possible, the difference, but you might have a bug that's only there in the real thing. So that's hard to avoid. I think here, the test would have worked if someone just clicked all the way through to getting it ready to send to the court. So, and that doesn't actually deliver anything. And that's what I did to confirm that it's been fixed.
That's what I was suggesting as a test, right? I wasn't suggesting, I was, at least I assumed
that's a very idiosyncratic part. So Michelle, that's a really idiosyncratic part of this specific issue, right?
That's fair, that's fair.
So it wouldn't always be enough to test by just getting to a final screen without delivering something, but.
I mean, the idea would be that it would test everything up to actually sending something, because I assumed which would catch everything that comes before actually sending something. So it's not just about this particular step. I'm just saying it would test everything up to, but excluding sending the actual email, if that is a problem. If it's not a problem, then that's fine. But
I think that would help. I think that's a great thing for us to do. And we have to decide what's the spread of interviews we want to test. We want to test every interview before we go to production, which for certain dependency packages, it might make sense to do.
I was about to say, how hard would it be to make a dependency tree, or not tree, graph? Not graph. Yeah, how hard would it be to make do dependency resolution of we want to change this package, it affects all these other packages. We'd at least have to be able to scan all the other packages, and if hopefully they've put it depends on the appeals court or it depends on assembly line for and so we would know which packages to test and which ones would be fine. And then
I think we could handle, because there's only so many interviews that have dependencies at all, right? So that when we update it, it's going to affect multiple interviews. So I think even if we just hard coded it, we could just say, okay, this is the test when we install AL document, or when we install a new version of assembly line, rather. This is the test when we install a new version of Mass Appeals Court. The other one that's multiple interviews are affected by is the Affidavit of Indigency.
Yeah,
So-
are we gonna have more like the affidavit? I know the civil docketing might start getting integrated in more, but
Civil docketing might, I think the big one is going to be this, the language, the request for an interpreter.
yeah, that will be a lot. So
So there is one issue, which is that I don't know if we want to have an automated tool installing packages on the production server. So we have to think about that. There's definitely, we have some limits there because of the privacy of the data on the production server, where we have basically promised that there's only Suffolk staff who are going to install stuff on production, and that we've had to sign something with the court.
I can try and make a separate setup, a version that skips the setup, and that you can just give it the URL to go to.
Okay.
That will take a bit of work, though. There are a lot of assumptions in there based on making a new package.
So would it be enough, like, let's say we're going to test how many
I mean, a new project.
are installed on here. Let me just see. It's not that many. It's like 15 or 20. Oh, shoot. I gotta update this one probably. Oh, no, I think this is the issue. Hold on. I'm not going to show that. Let me pause my share. Okay, there were no keys that were private that were displayed there, so I'm just making sure.
are you sure? I was gonna say, I'm
They were all the
targeting
default
YouTube
ones at the
videos, so to
top.
speak. Okay.
Okay. So people can see the default doc-assemble password for your database, but I'm not too worried about that. Okay. I think here is what I really wanted to show, which is, I can resume the share if you can see that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. So that's 9, 10. So it's about 25 interviews. So if we tested those 25 interviews every time one of those 3 interviews got updated, would that be, should we try to triage it more? Because obviously only some interviews depend on the Affidavit of Indigency. Only some interviews depend on the appeals court stuff. Do we need to narrow it down more, or can we just test 25 interviews and we upgrade assembly line, Affidavit of Indigency, or interpreter requests? What do you think, Michelle, just timing wise? I mean, I don't care if it takes an hour, honestly, but
I mean,
if it
it'll
has
take an hour.
2 days.
So
that would
like,
be-
We have
I think
we
it
have
won't
free
take
time.
2 days.
It won't
Yeah.
take 3 days.
I don't think it will take 3 days. I think it will take a while, but I don't think it will take 3 days. It also depends like how thoroughly we decide to test each one, right? Like
Yeah,
if we have specific, just like a test for each that we run, or if it runs through all the tests for that interview at that URL, right?
They're integration tests, so we shouldn't be running like, and these are integration tests on prod, which I'm still a bit, I feel weird about running. I feel like it'd be better if we had like, if these were run on test and then the report of test was like, it's run like, this is the exact environment was a run in, and make it easy to like make sure production is that environment before we make it, or before we like update it. And like just doing this exact same stuff we're talking about just on test, and then making sure like if it's good, then production matches tests, and if it's not, then we can fix things before it doesn't. But that's beside the point. I think either way, like an hour is fine. It would be a perfectly fine delay for like doing it.
Yeah.
And but mostly we wouldn't want to do like every single scenario. We would want to do whichever scenario covers most pages of the interview.
It's going to be more like 3 or 4 hours, I think. I mean, even assuming each one only takes 5 minutes, that's 25 times 5 minutes. So just FYI.
So some of the actually the vast majority of the interviews don't have any send to court code. That doesn't really matter though for the test we're talking about. That's just one particular regression we ran into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So never mind. That's not really relevant.
But it will be a bit shorter because it won't be installing. It's gonna be a
that's true.
while. Like it's not gonna be installing a new project, which is like takes a bunch of time. Usually it takes like 1 or 2 minutes. So yeah, it depends. But I think it will be more than an hour. It will.
Well, 3 hours seems okay to me. I don't know. What do you think, Bryce?
That also seems okay to me. Like I feel there's not, as long as we're not getting to the point where it's actually a day and actually like would take a long enough time, but like 3 hours is enough that like we can, like worst case if it runs overnight anyway, or like best case it's like, okay, we finish something in the morning, it runs its 3 hours, and then by the afternoon, like it's working, someone notifies the Suffolk staff who are allowed to update things on production, and we do it, or we update it. Or if we're running on production itself, like if it's good, and we don't do anything, or if it's bad, we notify whoever needs to be notified, and it gets fixed. Like by the end of the day, essentially.
So the other downside I see of it being long is the fact that this isn't like a tried and true system, right? It's not like we are solid that this system is going to work and that like the way that we expect, just because like it's in development.
System meaning these
The testing
rules of
framework.
powers of it? The framework.
The testing
itself.
framework.
Okay.
So like it depends how people feel about the possibility of hitting an error that is related to the testing framework as opposed to, right? But we
Like
can try and
how many flakes come from the framework itself as opposed to something wrong with the actual framework.
right, and that's a lot better now for sure. But like,
Yeah.
it's I wouldn't say it's not a concern, right?
So you're saying we might get false positives or whatever. Maybe I
False
don't know, false
false.
positives or false negatives, false errors.
Yeah,
Errors.
yeah, false errors. So, like I'd love to say, hey, no, this is going to be smooth the whole way, but I'm not ready to guarantee that kind of thing, right?
One thing that would really help a lot is if there's just one screenshot, if there were a way to see that as its own artifact. I don't know if that's possible, because then you don't have to open. That's the thing that takes a lot of steps.
It's not. I tried so long. We can, if we make some, like there are things we could do that would require some work so that we have a website that serves the images ourselves, right? But like we cannot GitHub just does not work that way. I find it very frustrating, very annoying, but
That you can't just have an easily viewable image?
you can't just see an image there, right? Like you can't just look on the summary page and see the images that were uploaded. Yeah, even one image, it requires.
Well, then maybe like a special, because I can see this being an issue. If you run 25 tests and there's like a 1 in 3 failure of the test being wrong incorrectly, then the next time you run it, it's a different set of tests that are wrong incorrectly, right? So that could actually be something to worry about. If the most common
well, it's named
failure
after
is like
the.
it's not ready, is that one where we can just like a special case error for it?
So not ready is like.
That's not
like this is a whole. Do we want to like? I'm ready to have this
I would take 2
discussion.
minutes for it. That's it. I'm not saying like we have to go into deep into it.
Okay, so like.
Is there anything we
Tests are
can
named
do
by their
to?
scenarios, and so like you should be able to differentiate them that way. And as far as like
When the test fails, just because like the server didn't finish restarting or whatever, is there any way for us to like highlight that in the error report? Because then people could decide,
I mean, there's an error message now that specifically it shows you what error was displayed. What if it's a doc assemble error? What doc assemble error was displayed on the page?
and it has that in the text report, not just in the artifacts.
Yep.
Okay, so that's just something that I hadn't seen yet.
Though that mostly happens when you're installing a package. So, but sure, yeah.
I think since well, definitely this is a good tool that we can use, and through this kind of real scenario development usage, it's going to help the testing framework development, that's for sure. But also I'm thinking that we may also want to have some manual intervention in terms of, let's say, we made some changes in assembly line, and we may have like a team discussion and say, what do you think this could potentially affect? Then you have more people brainstorm and think about all the possible situations or types of interviews that could be affected. Because sometimes you just want to people think about it, you may miss some points, but if you have a team brainstorm, then people have different thoughts, different ideas, then it may reveal more things, more directions to consider. Oh, maybe that's something where we should look at, or maybe that's something we should test, or have kind of a human intervention before we go into this. Let's run this automatic testing. That way you have both sides combined, and then have more insurance, I think.
No, I hear what you're saying. I guess, are you suggesting that we do this kind of brainstorm that we're doing now with more people? Or are you saying for each interview, the dev should kind of do a brainstorm of what everything it could affect is?
No, I'm saying that for major repositories like assembly line or
So maybe
waiver, or something that when you change it can affect others. If it's an individual interview, if it's run, it doesn't have a report effect. But if it's something like assembly line, and when you change some key variable that affects a whole bunch of interviews, that's the kind of changes that we may want to have some kind of team discussions instead of just, okay, let's do it and then push testing and push it. Because
you're saying on this forum, maybe like we could just do like a little pre-launch review before it goes live.
Right.
I think that's a good idea. I think we could do that. I mean, I'm hoping that we'll kind of have checked all those that list off with the specific tests. But maybe each time it's good just doing a reflection, say, hey, anybody else have anything else they think we should check that this might affect? That seems fine.
Yeah. I understand the idea. Is it just more like I'm confused on when we're doing this though. Is this like for a PR for a specific feature, or just like here when, okay, we're gonna bump like assembly line, let's look at all the changes that have happened between now and what's on production and brainstorm what's gonna change?
I think it will be before merging to master. When you merge into master, to me, that means everything is green, we can go. But
it could be
also,
before we go live on production.
I want to ask, in this particular case, when they was that error a surprise?
I mean,
error that could be avoided.
It was code that was changed like in March, right? And then we just never installed it. So it was a surprise when it happened today, or on Friday, whatever. So yeah, that was a surprise.
Right. So I think going back to my first thoughts, that I think we should have a more like a written down kind of procedure for the installation. What's the criteria, what's the steps? Because I think in the beginning, when we have a handful, when we have 20, 30 forms, it's more manageable. You can all do it you can manage it in your head, and it's clear. But as more and more people contribute and making more forms, it's going to grow very, very fast. So I think it would be good to have a standard procedure when I at my old job where we had a special team. It's a small team, but their main job is just to do the pushes, just do the pushes. But they follow a very strict protocol, and that and like in most of days you feel that that's just like a waste of time. But at critical points, that's
Can we
how
take-
they assure there's nothing break, because
Can we
they
take the
put that
temperature on the
product-
room on this? Because if everybody agrees, then I think we don't need to debate it more.
Yeah, no, I guess my takeaway would be like, I think of course in the pull request review, code review, we're already going to be looking at, what does this affect? My thought is maybe people could add some notes there in the pull request itself, and maybe we can use that as a log before we install something in production too. Like, hey, this might affect this behavior in other interviews, if people can think of it. And then before we install something in production, my suggestion is there are going to be a lot of reasons why we might want to install something within a day. I think installing it within an hour is like reserved for like a really serious kind of user facing bug we should avoid if we can do tests before we do that. But still, I don't think we want to wait a week for a lot of installs. So we might want to just have a thread on Teams for that. But I don't think it should be our only check, but it should just be like one extra check. I think that's fair. Does that seem like a fair summary of what we want to do? I just want to make sure before we say everyone agrees with it, that we know what it is we're going to agree on. Does that feel like a good description?
Yeah, that's time-wise. I think that it makes sense. Another thought is that maybe we are saying when you are aware of a form, then you would do the installation. But if you're not, then you may not be able to do it. So is there a standard way to make sure that there's no gap? For example, let's say we have a spreadsheet or on Trello or wherever, you have this fixed location where anyone who is ready to push something to the website, they go to this spot and enter this thing. And when you needed to install, you go to that same place. It's okay, these are the ones that are ready. So you do this at whatever time interval you do it.
So what I'm hearing from that, Lily, is like that maybe we need a checklist that people follow each time that they.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I, as a person who sometimes reviews, would not feel confident in my ability to identify issues like the one we had this time. Just FYI.
Yeah, I feel like, especially as it was a regression, I think like the main way we could have caught it is by testing all of our old interviews. I think that's really the only way to do it.
I have a just a plug for the new Trello board potentially could be used for this. Like once we actually start going through the, has been in the list for 90 days, let's talk about it. It could be, let's run it through to the end and make sure that it like we don't encounter something. And this one was what we caught it 5 months after the fact. So a difference of 2 months can be, could just caught it earlier in the summer, but just potential use there.
So would that be, Aubrey, like just checking every 3 months, just go through and check all the old interviews work, basically? Is that the idea?
So maybe just like anything that hasn't been looked at in 90 days. So if it's that production board is still kind of in the we need to actually use it stage, but once we're actually using it, cards will only go into the needs review column after they've been sitting there untouched for 90 days. They'll just be in the form is live. And so now when you have, say we launch a form today, it's in the form is live 90 days from launch, it would go into that needs review. And that could just be part of the flow and discuss whether it needs any other updates, other legal things, but it would just help catch things while you're working on another way to think about this.
And then I think like part of the issue here was like it was a little bit of an obscure package that was getting updated. So it would have been hard to catch, I think. It would not enough people would have been looking at it, but I guess that's maybe our threshold should be lowered. So anytime you're updating an interview, that any other interview depends on, we'll follow this procedure, I guess, would be the way to think about it. Okay, this was really great. I see like a couple of like really concrete to-dos. I think one is, I might take on this one, coming up with a way to give a report of package versions, because I've been playing around with that API already. Michelle, I'm hoping you might take this one on. I don't know if that's the right assumption. The tests, writing the tests. We're starting them at least.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Goodness, right.
Hang on just a sec. Let me, I was writing down the Trello one.
Oh, it's already on there.
Oh, I didn't see that. Well, yeah, that's the one I just wrote. So,
Oh,
it's below. Okay. I
didn't
see.
seem
Got
related
it.
to this. That's all.
Got it. So you said which one? Add integration tests of all the affected interviews when certain key packages get installed. I can do some. I would love if some other people became familiar with writing tests. So
yeah, I think
that would
that's
be
a good goal. Something to keep in mind with like all the things that we're doing, right, is like we can't all be deep experts in everything, but doesn't mean we shouldn't share information. And our goal for like when we're writing new behavior, of course, too, also should be like thinking about that like skill zero kind of startup. What's the startup cost for someone to learn it?
Sure, but I don't want to be the bus factor for tests. So I don't want to be like, if I leave, I don't want like no test to be able to be written or run just because I'm gone.
Agreed.
Like,
No.
Yeah. We just have to balance those two things. You're totally right about that.
Okay.
Lily, could I ask
other-
you to like come up with this checklist? Would you be open to working on that, Lily?
Okay, I can give it a try.
Okay. I mean, some of them, they're just human things, right? But we have to have it written down somewhere.
Yeah.
Let me see.
I also have to develop how to run from a URL, just like from multiple URLs, specific tests. I'm not quite sure how I would, never mind. That can be a different discussion for a different time, just the technical issues, but yeah.
Okay, here's one idea. I don't know if it's the right one, especially if we're talking about doing these tests on the test server and not the production server, is getting a list of installed interviews with the API, because that's a really easy API to use. And then it also includes the URL to run each interview.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions, but it's only one. So I think
The problem there is, of
it's a
course,
longer
like,
discussion.
what data you need to get to the end of the interview isn't necessarily contained in that in any way. But
Yes, that is another one of the issues. Right. So, okay,
to date, I guess this is just a
I have to think about.
procedure change. I think that's a good point. If we have these integration tests, then I'll feel a lot more confident about doing this, right? So, because now we're catching some random bugs this way.
Mhm.
So I'm not necessarily going to rush this one, but any other thoughts people have? This was a really good discussion.
Yeah, I have kind of one other thought in a slightly like different direction, which is like what message does the user get when their email doesn't work? And is that useful? Can we make it more useful?
Yeah, do we actually have air screens on production?
Okay, and it kind of says like, report this and try again, next week, or like, what does it?
Depends on the
Sounds
error. So there still could be errors that take you to a docassemble error message, which maybe that's something else we could talk about. Is like, is there a way for us to improve error handling?
That is a very good idea.
Um,
Jonathan said that doc assemble errors don't show on production.
uh,
It says,
it will show that it will not show the traceback, but it will show the error message.
okay, got it.
And you can customize the error screen, which we do
Yeah,
not.
I think it's mostly we need to customize the air screen. I don't know if we have any of that yet.
Okay, cool.
We should probably, ideally, if we can, figure out a way to make it work. Have the error screen on production take people to a bug submission page.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Package.
That's what I was saying about.
But we do get errors emailed to us now, which would have essentially the same information. Maybe the person could give us more details.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe the person then feels like they, have had the ability to have an effect on the situation. I think also
We
their
could also,
mental health is an important-
on this air screen, we could also let them know that like, hey, like you've come across an error. We've been notified of it, but feel free
That's
to
good.
like also give us feedback in case there's any additional information that you think we should know.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like it.
I mean, this actually, I don't want to start this discussion now, but maybe I could just highlight the issue and people can look at it. So I did create an issue a little while ago, which I know Bryce saw. I don't know if anyone else noticed it, which was just like general safety ideas. And maybe people can look at that and see if they have other thoughts about it that they want to add. So I'll just dump this link into our thread and maybe also on the assembly line channel. So it's highlighted again there. So look at that when you have time. There's some other thoughts. Okay, so I have a real hard stop at 12:30. I do definitely want to talk about this data leakage thing. If there's any ideas that people could have that could take us further. Are we okay with pausing this discussion here? And everyone have some clear to-dos?
For sure.
Okay. All right. So let's see if I can open up the issue that I have for this. Let's see. All right. So here's the basic description of the issue. I was following up on a report someone submitted feedback on the CDC moratorium letter. I couldn't reproduce their specific issue, but when I ran it, on the preview page, that particular interview shows a PDF preview. A lot of I think the preview is there on all of the forms, actually, now I think about it. The preview page of the form before the person signed it showed a completely different document. And it says here, civil action cover sheet is the one that happened to show up. On the final download screen, there was also a preview image, and that's not on all of our forms, but this one did have that. And on that page, it showed the civil docketing statement as the form that was in the preview. When I clicked on the download buttons that were in the download list HTML, only on the final download screen that appears. But when I did that, it showed the right form. And the send email button also showed the right form. So I caught that behavior once when I ran it. Can't remember now if I ran it a second time before trying to restart the server, but anyway, at some point I did just save the config to trigger a restart of all of the background processes of restarts the Python server, Flask and UWSGI and Nginx all get restarted when you save the config. So I did that. I ran the interview again. I saw the right form that time. So I had heard a similar report from Mia on a different server, also using AL document class and AL document bundle. And when Michelle, I think you might be one of the very few people using AL exhibit, although Aubrey, I know that you and Catherine have been starting to use it as well. Michelle had run into something similar with the AL exhibit class with the test that she was running, where when she uploaded files, the file that was shown on a as PDF method call was not the one that she had uploaded. So I don't think I could see from your test, Michelle, if the same thing was happening with the AL document bundle or not. when you download it, the download list HTML rather, or anyway, we don't have to go into that.
At least when I hit the view button on the download page, I believe it had the wrong documents there.
So that's a difference from my test. So I actually don't really want to chase it down in AL exhibit because there's just so many different things potentially going on there. But I suspected the behavior is a problem with the AskPDF method of AL document bundle specifically, because I saw it in an interview that did not use any uploads at all. And it's very mysterious to me, but I did start to try to think about potential causes. I'll just show like one thing that I was thinking about, which was there's this weird Python behavior with class variables versus instance variables. And I started to I was trying to look at, well, what are we doing here in this document that could be causing some data to be shared across multiple sessions on the same server, which I think is what's happening. So hold on. Maybe the thing to start with is like, okay. Something that's interesting about Michelle, your test did not use our standard variable names, actually. It doesn't use AL user bundle, AL court bundle, right?
It does not.
So it's not a simple, oh, but you were seeing only data from the same test.
No.
The files were.
I have seen other people's documents, very different documents.
That had nothing to do with the test.
Yeah.
Because what I saw in the interview you linked me was, well,
there was at least one document in there that was not to
file.
do with the test document. It had I think it was someone's test document, but it wasn't my test document.
It was a test uploaded file. I'm wondering if there's an issue with variable names, is what I'm trying to get down to.
Well, who else has been testing the exhibits?
Probably Audrey and Catherine.
Maybe.
It's been built. I don't know how much things have actually been paid attention to, if I'm being honest.
Okay. Well, we don't know about that, I guess. So that may or may not be a clue. So I would like to just figure out like, what is our detective story here? Like, how are we going to try to track this down and figure out where the actual issue is? So like one thing is like, well, where could the be?
One second. I don't think anybody other than me has been running the test AL exhibits.yaml file, which
so
has
actually
unique
variable
names.
Okay, that's good to know, but I don't think we need to do that to figure out just the potential problems. That's okay. That's like a really specific detail. I was on one possible thread. It'll be, because we only have a half hour, I want to just kind of do the brainstorming and then we can actually do the thorough checking of each possibility. So does everyone understand how I'm describing the problem? Like what actually happened? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah, I do have a thought when we were
okay.
Talking about the death. I remember when I first started to do the class versus I mean the init versus just directly use def. I remember I saw online people are saying it is important to use init because that makes sure that you always start with a clean slate. Otherwise, different versions can run into each other.
Yeah, that might be this exact problem that I'm talking about as one of potential causes, which is this class scoped.
Right. And
those
I,
attributes.
well, I definitely agree with
That seems like one thread I definitely want to tease a little
I
bit
did-
more.
I do want to say that this A item, I'm not sure is, I think it's a description of a hypothesis, but I'm not sure it's a description of the problem. But maybe I don't understand what it's.
How would you
So-
phrase the problem being differently? Because we know that
I would say that documents, the incorrect documents show up. I would not name as PDF as the culprit. That for me would be a hypothesis. That maybe as PDF is the culprit, but I don't know
No.
that we've identified that specifically.
Noted. So we might have to scope it up or down. I don't really see any of the examples that didn't involve as PDF though, because so far. It may also appear, because as PDF is invoked anytime that you're getting a PDF, whether that's in the bundle or not. If you're in the download list, HTML also invokes as PDF. But I don't think that is a bad point to note here. Like, can we not type while I'm typing?
sorry, that was my bad.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we can dive in a little bit to each of these, like as far as like what are things to look at. I'm wondering if, without going into a lot of detail about these, like does anyone have other things that they would want to think about here?
I do have a question now.
Yeah.
What is, okay, when we go from preview to download, they say download is correct one, but the preview sometimes can be wrong. Now, what's the relationship between these two? Because they are basically producing the same files. Why is it that the result is different?
Well, because it regenerates the file when it adds the signature. Actually, every page load, in theory, should be getting a unique generation of that file. So we did that in order to avoid problems with variables not being recalculated. Because if someone clicks the review button, they get a stale version of the document when they come back to the same page.
Okay,
If the
then,
document has already been generated.
all right. So two
So
thoughts.
we generate it fresh per page load.
So one is when you say it brought up the wrong files that you ran yesterday. When you ran it yesterday, did you finish to go all the way to download? Or did you start at preview?
I went all the way to the download page.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's why I was able to see two different wrong files on that particular interview that I ran.
A quick question I have that I don't want to forget to ask is, do we need to take down some things online now? Is there a danger that people are seeing other people's documents?
Well, that's part of what I'm trying to figure out, both the plan of attack and if there's any mitigation that we should think about. I don't think we should start changing stuff until we know more about the problem. But if we had some mitigation we could do that was less harmful than leaving things as is. That was part of why I was wondering if it happened with people with other people's files, because most people presumably only create one interview on our server. That would be the majority of use cases.
So I got other people's files, right?
So you say, yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to videotape. I will show you on the videotape where I see.
I'm not saying you're
other
wrong,
people's
but I'm just
files.
like, what is the action that we can take? You're saying like, just take our server offline. Like, what would be the action that we can take that we don't have any information to know what to do to mitigate it at this point?
What interviews are on assembly line are using fail document? It's not,
It's
I don't remember.
probably about half of them, that's my guess.
Okay.
So
We don't
did
even
you,
know that's where the problem is, actually, unfortunately, but yeah.
did you say anyone had this similar issue on Jonathan's Slack channel?
The other person who I know of who had the problem was Mia, and she was using AL document.
So then
think-
it's not a Docker symbol issue, are we sure?
No,
want
we
to
do not
confirm
know
it with
Docker.
Jonathan?
It very well could be a DACA symbol issue. We've only seen it, I've only seen it in interviews that use the AL document and AL document bundle classes.
I think maybe the question is the relative, like which is more harmful, right? That would be my question. I don't know. This is a new space for me, but that's
I think we
what
need
the
a lot
question
more
is.
information before we can decide that. So like, I think as we start investigating it more and have some small reproductions that we can confirm the frequency and where the origination of the files is, we could trace that, track that down. And I think we would know if there's mitigations we can take before we can solve it. But at this point, I feel like I'm flying blind, and any action could very well be more harmful than no action. I'd rather not start doing things until we know what the possible effect of them could be. I've seen this once. One other person told me they saw it. I saw one test from you. That's all. Those are the data points that I have. And especially
Over
because
how long?
And I've
test was
described
from
another one.
a class that's not being used on production. So that's another issue, right? Because it wasn't testing just the base frame, it was testing the AL exhibit document. Sorry, there's more people were talking than I could hear. I'm sorry.
No, I think I was just asking over how long, like when was the first time we saw this?
I think I could find it from Mia's report. I think it was a
Yeah.
few weeks ago.
Few
She
weeks
just
ago.
told me.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't know where the problem is, unfortunately, but that could mean narrow it down to specific docassemble version.
Oh yeah, that's fair. I was more thinking of just like how frequently does it come up would be, we need to know about like over how long we've been looking at like these data points. And I just didn't know if it was like a month or if it was a few weeks or something, but yeah, okay.
So Michelle, you have only seen it when you did the testing for AL exhibit document, correct?
I mean, yeah, that's all I've been testing recently, but yeah. And I don't look at the documents anymore. Like that's not a thing I've been looking at, generally speaking.
Well,
Yeah,
you would have noticed it if it
the
were
two
like
or
the
three- the 2 or 3
moratorium,
times.
where it pops up a totally different interview on the screen. Like that would have been something obvious if you're just running through the test, I think.
Yeah, I haven't been doing a lot of interviews, so other people would
Okay.
have more information about that. I believe this time, last time, and maybe the previous time, the most recent times I've run the exhibit thing, that was I had this situation in those times.
So in all these scenarios where we saw this problem, it's always in the preview, not the final download. Is that right?
I don't think I
No.
hit download, so.
So then in the download, for the download part, it also uses PDF, right? I mean, the same core function, right?
Yes, it does use the same function. Well, I mean, and I think Michelle's right to point out we don't know for sure what function it is. That's the source of the issue. But yes, I think everything does trace back to that as far as I know.
Right, so that's a symptom that if it's docx, it's not a problem, it's PDF. So that's fine, that's related, that's good to know. Now, then the issue seems to be more between how the preview is generated and how the final download is generated. Do they call the same sub function or do they have different version of it?
They use a different key. So that's, I think, perhaps relevant. Like if we're talking about something where like there's variables leaking, they're technically different variables, right? So
Where is that key come from?
It's just the parameter that's passed to the method when you just on the display screen. But Lily, it actually did have the wrong file on the preview screen and the download screen. but the right file in the download list HTML method, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily the page that it was on that was the issue. It was potentially a sub case of the different methods that were invoked on the different pages, if that makes sense. But
Okay, so you said
I'd love to get
on the download, you get a zip, right? And
the zip was fine, the view button was fine, the download button was fine as far as I can remember. I don't know if I tried the downloads and view separately, but the preview image on the last screen was wrong. And not every interview has a preview image on the last screen. Like we took that off of a lot of our newer forms. It's not a default thing we had, but it did differ from the contents of the download section, the download list. In that one run.
It also, it isn't so easy to tell, like, yeah, I think we need more data because it's inconsistent. Sometimes I will see a document that I uploaded and sometimes I will see a different document. Sometimes I will see a different document that I uploaded and sometimes I will see a different document that someone else uploaded. That has been my experience so far.
And I had never seen the problem until I was chasing down this bug. So, and I do run a lot of interviews.
So before an interview starts, do we clean up all the cache?
I don't think we have any way to know.
That would be something that DocAssembly does. I don't think that's something that any of our code would run for cleaning up a cache. We expect DocAssembly to give us a new instance of a variable when we call it DA object or DA document bundle using or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. Like we're creating a new object, but like whether, yeah, exactly right. It's something that isn't at a layer that we've had to touch ever. Doesn't mean that.
But at least it doesn't look like it's clean. Maybe it is a DocAssembly issue.
Well, so here's let me just describe the way that the cache works in it and the way that files work in DocAssembly and see if that helps give anybody any ideas for where to troubleshoot more.
That would help.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bryce. Yes.
I was just gonna say that would help. I feel like I was trying to read Jonathan's response to you and I couldn't tell what exactly he was trying to say besides that files are accessed by numbers. So yeah, like just understanding more, a bit more might help.
So we could start with that part. When you upload a file or create a file in DocAssembly, it goes to a path on the server. So, and then it gets in the temp directory. So let me just try this. And we can do this. What? Well,
Should this be public?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, maybe we can cut this
Name
part
of
out
the server?
later.
the IP address. It should be okay.
You okay
I'm not going to
recording?
view any of the files. You can just see the file numbers if that's all right. I think that should be right. So I'm in the container now. I'm just going looking in the temp directory. And you can see there's a number of folders here, which were created by DocAssembly. Let's go inside one of those. It creates files that are named like this. I'm not going to open one of those. This is the dev server though, so it shouldn't be anybody's private information. Then there's a mirror of that information that's copied to S3. Now, I don't know what happens when you request a file from DocAssembly using the file. Basically, you're using the file API within the URL when you try to download a file that's linked. But it's basically giving this number and file name that just is like always like this, file dot something. And it's giving it a descriptive file name that you assigned it in the DA file class. So it's like basically masking the behavior for you. It's returning something on the file system and giving it a name that's not on the file system.
So it creates the number without taking the customized file name. It's always use that same name first.
Yes. That's my understanding of how it works. So Jonathan did link the full code, which I think could answer more, but I think that's probably the main thing to know. Like files are assigned a number when they're uploaded. They're given they all go into the same file structure. There's a place where this gets copied to S3. So I feel like that's one of the things I wrote down is like, is there a race condition with S3 where like we're getting a file that's saved in the temp directory that's different from what's on S3. Jonathan says the number is unique every time that you upload it. And looking at the code he linked, it looks like he's using a Postgres transaction. So let me move this over here. And that really should make a unique name each time. And generally, I'll say this, it generally seems to work.
That's the wrong thread.
So in that folder, there's only that number. Then how does it associate with the customized file name later?
It is done through the data structure that's in memory. So that every file in DocAssemble has, and I think I can look at this here, a number that's part of the object. It's going to be a little bit weird, but quotes. Maybe in double quotes.
Double quotes is Jason.
Okay, so here's an example of a DA file, and it has a number associated with it. So that's the reference back to the file that got created. So it knows the original path. And I don't think it serves it from this path. I think it serves it from S3, but it might be in reverse. It might download from S3 and store it in the temp file directory and serve from the temp directory. It's one of those two choices. I don't know which one. So you get this path here, and DocAssemble displays it with this file name here.
So you're saying this is in memory. So maybe that's where it can get confused if it's memory. How long does this stay? When does it get cleared?
Well, if this code really does make a unique file, I assume that's what db.session.add and db.session.commit does. I think it's creating a transaction.
Yes, that does feel right.
That means it should always be, it should be totally idempotent. That means like if we've run this twice and the transaction hasn't committed, it's never going to reuse the same file number.
Supposedly, but somehow it is occasionally.
Yeah.
And so we know that I guess we know that the numbers, well, okay, I guess the other thing is, do we know the number is wrong and that like that's the file that's being shown, or is it the number is correct somehow, but it's grabbing the wrong file? Or it's grabbing like whatever, like the actual file that's being shown has a different number than the one of the DA object that it has. I don't know if that makes sense, but
that's a really good question. And so Michelle did a test this morning with the AL exhibits class, and I looked at that. I traced down a file from the number to the image that Michelle had uploaded to me separately, and it matched the image she had uploaded to me separately. And then the version on S3 was the same as the version in the local file system in the temp directory. So I don't know if that's a good enough way to confirm that the numbers match. I think one avenue to try to test this could be to try to log file numbers and file names and somewhere separately and just say, hey, do those ever look like there's a collision?
It's not a bad idea.
Could definitely be one of the things to do. Not sure where to write that down, but all right. Lily, you had brought up this point about the class scoped attributes. I've been thinking about that too. And that's something, a test I think I'm willing to just do pretty easily is we have this, I was trying to track this down through the Python documentation, and I asked some other Python coders what they thought. And here's what we do right now with class variables. Docassemble likes attributes to be undefined. So we can't define them in the class or in the init method in most cases. But I figured out, hey, if I give the file name, if I give the attribute name here and give it a type annotation, it will let me have this description here, and the variable isn't, the attribute rather is not created in advance. But if I, like, let's say if I had changed this to be like file name equals ABC, or really more importantly, if I had named it, really the issue is when it's an object. It's not really much of an issue when it's an immutable thing like a string. It's if it's mutable that it matters. So if I had done this, this becomes a class attribute that's shared among every instance of the class. That's kind of feels like maybe it's like the behavior we're having, although I'm a little bit weirded out by the fact that it should be per thread, because the way that the DA lazy attribute works, it doesn't save anything from thread to thread. At least it's not supposed to. But anyway, like I don't think this annotation does the same thing as this at all. It doesn't seem to create an attribute that is shared among different instances of the class. But I am willing to, I think maybe one troubleshooting step is just to remove this. Because it's just meant to be documentation. It's not meant to be functional. I don't see any harm in removing it. So that's one troubleshooting step I'm going to take to address that potential issue with the class scope attributes.
I agree that's the best way. That's like the only way I've ever been able to handle like bugs that aren't consistently reproducible, is to just like sort of make changes that you know have no other downside, and then try to observe if they have any effect over like longer terms. Which is, I am afraid, might be how we have to just handle this if we can't find a specific reproduction.
The closest is, Michelle, you'd run into issue a lot with an exhibit document. I had never run into it in my test, but let me just check the versions of stuff.
Michelle, which server were you running this
Dev
on when you
server.
found it? This is just on dev? Okay.
Mhm. But one of them, the most recent thing was installed on the dev server. The other ones were when I was just running it from the playground.
Okay. Okay, but it's just in the dev server. I had forgotten that, I think. Okay.
Yeah, all of my, when I've been running it, I've been running it on the production server. Sorry, on the test server, not the production server. And I'm just going to check the versions of those foundational packages at least. Doesn't mean that everything else matches though. Okay, this is a different version. It's a branch that's not accepted yet. But I don't think it's a part that would affect any of this behavior. That was just YAML changes.
I'm just
Uh,
gonna let you know it's 12:31. And I know you had to go.
Yeah, I got to prepare for a meeting at 1, so I can go over a little bit later, and I think it's useful for me as long as other people are okay. But thank you for the reminder. Anyone else needs to sign off? Don't mind going a few extra minutes. Okay, Aubrey signed up, which is okay. I think we probably weren't having as much help for her on this as the first question we discussed. Any other brainstorm ideas for what things to look into? Some of these are going to be way more of a pain to test than others. But
I feel like it's, yeah, and I feel like these are all like good things to look into, but I don't know how much we'll be able to be like, oh, this is certain, unless maybe we just like, is there any other information besides like what you got from Michelle in terms of the JSON? Like, does it make sense to like, oh, if we have like JSON and like you doing a bit of snooping on the server itself under the hood to try and figure out things? Like, is there any other information that we can get? Like, I don't know if it makes sense to have look at like dev tools and see like what was downloaded to the page. Like if that URL that like the PNG preview that is shown is like a different URL than what the file number is. Or if you can even get that without, if you don't run it first, I don't remember on DevTools, if you need to have the network being recorded when you.
You do, but you know,
The
when I
network tab
load
open.
the session, it seems to be the right. I can open up that session, right? There's nothing in there that was.
I haven't touched it.
All look like test files, so
No,
I don't want to put that
they're
on.
all random
Yeah, no.
things.
It was mostly just like, is if there's more information that we can get from reproductions that would help in future reproductions or like better understanding, that would help a lot. Mostly just because I feel like all these other changes we might make, and if unless we actually know that they are the case, we're gonna do like we'll try it and then we won't see anything for a few weeks. It might be okay, and then something pops, like the same issue pops up again 2 weeks later, and then okay, that wasn't it. Let's like check that off the list and try a few other things, and that can go on for a while, unless we have it. I don't, but just the way it sounds like it's working, I don't even know if there would be a good reproduction. And so maybe it's less getting a reproduction, more of completely understanding what has happened in a certain, like in a certain reproduction, like being able to trace every single thing that happens better.
Oh, I kept thinking about cache. That was interesting. That showed a different file when I refreshed.
Oh,
This said Exhibit A before I refreshed.
Yeah.
So maybe just hadn't finished loading, because that's the second document actually. Might have just been a delay in painting the page.
that happens sometimes, yeah.
Now let me just try that again and see.
Which, side note, I know is a like negative user experience when things pop and shift other things. But I think I don't know if there's actually a way you can fix that in Doctable.
I think there probably are ways we could fix it, but because it's so slow, I don't know. Do we want it to be totally blocking until the whole page is loaded?
Less blocking, but I know there are like tags and attributes you can put on images that are like, it's mostly you have to, it's I think it's you have to fix the image size is one way of doing it, and it will just like you just say, hey, it's going to be this size. The browser renders it just blank until it gets the information.
You have a
And-
placeholder.
We could probably do that. I would imagine that might be
Maybe
worth it.
that's
like
a
a thing
very-
with a circle or something or dots.
That's fair. That's mostly a large sidetrack.
Well, I just realizing like, I didn't even think about browser cache as a problem before, but seems like it could be an issue potentially.
But the
If-
documents that you described seeing when you went to my interview sounded like the same documents that I had been seeing, in which case
No,
we
that's
were
true.
having the same experience.
That's true. That does rule that out. Good point. Just hadn't thought that through. This is what you see on yours, right? Chelsea.
Yeah. Or I mean, I can try it right now. I can go there and Let's see if it's what I see.
I think it's what we talked about before, at least.
But even there's this then. Didn't the second one say Exhibit A at the first? It didn't have that title
Yeah,
page.
definitely said Exhibit A in
Yeah,
the second file.
yeah.
That's definitely different. It's the same assortment of files. I don't remember seeing this one before.
It's a similar assortment of files, but I mean, I can show you from the video that I had. Like all of these ones so far, ones that are like that the test runs, like when the test runs, it uploads these files, but I saw one that was definitely not one that was from the tests or what I had uploaded.
This definitely looks like a different file to me than what was there before. I don't remember seeing something called sample PDF one.
Okay.
This thing has so much going on. Like I'm hoping we can get a test that's a lot smaller. And to go to your question, Bryce, what I was thinking is Exhibit A still in here? Let's see. Well, that's the cover page. So that actually really should never have been the thing anyone saw, unless someone uploaded a PDF called Exhibit A, which they might have to confuse us at some point. I would want to look at the file number. Like basically what I was saying when I went to log, I would want to figure out a way to put that on the screen. That would be helpful to see. And then I think we only can compare it to see like if one of the interviews that has a leaked image had the same file number. That's all I can really think of.
Mhm.
For
No,
what
you-
would more information to help us test it. Sorry, Lily, what were you going to say?
It's okay. If the browser cache could also be a issue, is there a way for the program to clear it?
It seems like browser cache is not an issue because both Quentin and I on our separate browsers are experiencing inconsistent behavior from this interview. The
Yeah.
same interview. He is using a link that I shared with him from my existing interview.
I could turn off this cache and see. That's a helpful button. I hadn't seen that before. There is some caching that DocAssemble does on the Nginx side. So, but I would imagine it doesn't come into play with the file, but maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. It's a totally different document, definitely different.
And still not any of the ones that I uploaded.
But presumably,
This is another
like a
one from
test
the
file,
test
right?
one. Yeah,
so
but that's my account is not involved with the tests any longer.
So that's a good
when
test.
you were running the test, you never uploaded that file?
Oh, maybe when I ran them myself, but still, if you want, I can show you on the video where there is a document that I definitely never uploaded.
So that could confirm that that happened, but unless I could actually see the files, it wouldn't get me much further to solving the problem. That's like, I want to see like where it's overlapping. The best thing I have is the file number, but the next best would be like some shared variable name space thing. I mean, this is actually really good that this is really consistently showing this behavior, because maybe I could just try that totally harmless fix of removing the type annotations in the class definition here and see if that clears the issue on that one interview, which seems to be doing something different every couple of refreshes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, well, I don't want to have to set up the logging thing, because then the thing is like, how do we figure out we have to set up a lot of infrastructure for that to work? Unless we log it to just the regular DocAssemble log, but that will just be really hard to parse.
Can't you log it to the console?
No, because we need to run it. I would like to compare if 2 interviews have a shared file, we'd have to run this over an extended period of time. The log I was thinking of. Does the file number match across 2 unrelated sessions where it shouldn't ever match? I'm looking basically as a way for me to think of a way to find collisions in the file numbers.
Mhm.
So that's not going to ever be helpful inside one interview. It would have to be compared.
But we as humans could save what was logged, and then, we wouldn't have to build a system for it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think the issue is that you can't have users just say what was logged, because it would be like if there's not an issue and like, oh, I have this file, it's the same file I uploaded, that's not an issue and you don't get that information. Whereas someone else then gets the same file as before, like the person you uploaded before, you need to know what that person uploaded. So it needs to be logged, and every single time you run something on the internet and on the server, it needs to be logged.
Got it.
I'm just hoping that the logging isn't needed, but I think if we do it, automated logging would be the way to go.
Yeah.
And I guess I would probably want to put it in a database.
Sure.
Yeah, and that does seem heavy-handed to have an entire separate system on the server to check for this, but it might be worth it.
There might be another place to store it that's not involving setting up a database for it, but well, we've definitely confirmed that it happens. Like again, this is a good reproduction of it, but there's so many things to look at here that I would really like to find a really small reproduction that we consistently do, or even like every 10th time would be okay.
Or
But-
maybe can we like have a temporary special screen where you just save the file numbers and run it for a week or whatever, and then just see if there's any replicates.
Yeah, and that would just track the issue, like if it were on the file system that the problem was happening, right? Like it would help catch like just one of the possible problems. But I think, hopefully, is there any other like easier lift things people can think of to check? I can't even tell if this is even plausible, the class scoped attribute issue, because of the way DA lazy attribute works in my head. It should never matter. But
That is how bugs show up when
true.
it seems like it doesn't matter. So like it's mostly like it seems very unlikely, but also the downsides of like commenting out those attributes are pretty low. Like
Yeah,
the chance
there's
that
no
it catches people who use the API wrong, which there aren't any at this point. So like everyone's using the API as it is now, and no one's going to be starting to use the API and pass a file when we expect a string in the next week or so. So
Yeah, no, you're right. Okay. Okay, so file number is one thing to look at. Can anybody think of anything else that we could try to log or to compare to narrow it down? Like, I'm not really quite sure where to think about the shared memory issues. I guess we'd have to be looking upstream at the Flask session for that.
yeah. Don't know enough about Flask.
I know almost nothing about it. You know more than me now because you've written.
Have written about Flask thing. It was very much a single API or a single like annotation that I added though. But yeah.
Also, something that could be good is enough to get a really small, like I can't ask Jonathan to look at however many thousand lines of code there is in this file. Only, not that many, 1,300. But that's still like, there are enough dependencies. If we had like this can reproduce it and it was really small and it's an upstream bug, we don't actually necessarily have to figure out where the bug is in docassemble if we just have a small test case for it.
That can reproduce it consistently.
I can reproduce it consistently, or even every 10th time. So, I mean, the other thing to think about is there could be something wrong with the version of a package that's a core PI package and not a docassemble package at all. Because sometimes those aren't upgraded at the same rate on different servers, depending on when the server was installed. I think. I could be wrong about that. Well, I'm thinking that probably this is the inspiration people have right now. If people think about it more, if you come up with another way to reproduce it, that would be really great, a really small test case. Then let me know. I'll definitely use that. But I'm going to try to prioritize this. And my approach right now, I guess keep an eye out for this. If you can see when you're running interviews, if something like this happens, particularly ones that are like production interviews, then let me know. Because that would be helpful to know how frequent this is a problem.
What is that interview? Can you give me the link that Michelle had problems?
Michelle
I
was
can run
really-
it too and see just, and the more people try it and always get the same thing, then something different.
Yes, that's a good point. Because I'm using the same session that Michelle's using.
So do you want the same interview, or do you want the same general interview in which this was happening, or do you want the interview that I went through, like a shared link to an existing interview? Do you want it fresh, or do you want the one that?
Give me the one you have, and then I can also run the fresh and see if they behave the same way.
This is, I'm putting on the Teams. This is the interview that I saw the problem in, which has a little bit less to mess around with potentially, especially if we could cut it down. I don't know. I don't think it's doing anything special that would trigger it in this interview and not any other random interview. But if we could make a really small interview that just doesn't even upload a file, but in the CDC one, there are no uploads. The problem shows when you're just showing a filled in PDF and you're combining it with 2 documents. So I think that might be the minimum that's needed, is having at least 2 documents that are concatenated together.
Yeah.
As far as Jonathan says, he says that's the only way there could be data leakage, is because PDF concatenate gets raw file system access. So if we're not doing that step, there's no way to combine files that weren't owned by the same user and let someone see the file. They get a file not found error. So that would be my hope, is that someone else can reproduce it in a much smaller interview that doesn't involve as much different pieces of the code. Any other closing thoughts anybody has? Okay. All right. Well, if you do have any, let me know. And I will, hopefully we'll have action points on this. Even if it is hey, we do have to take something offline, we'll know if we really need to do that in the next few days, even if we haven't solved the issue. But maybe it'll just be this problem, and that'll be really easy. These annotations. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right.